I do want to welcome everyone to Zoom Link B. And we're all here for the session with Jenn Page from the Hurricane Island Center for Science and Leadership.
All right, hello everyone. I really appreciate the chance to come and hang out with all of you for this session, and the fact that people are interested in this concept of personal and professional resilience in this new era of education. I saw some of you yesterday in the Wabanaki Reach group, so it's good to see some familiar faces back from that and faces otherwise that I already know. I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm assuming you can see slides now, just as a, okay, I'm seeing nodding heads, fantastic. So with this up, I'm gonna have a harder time monitoring chat, but I will be going back and forth trying to see everything, but hopefully, hopefully we get everybody's questions, needs, and everything else answered. So yes, I'm Jenn Page. I'm the Director of Education for the Hurricane Island Center for Science and Leadership. And when I started talking with Yvonne and the rest of the Island Institute crew about what they might need for this year's Island Teacher Conference, one of the things that Yvonne said was the kind of self-care, self-awareness, the idea of how do we take care of ourselves and be resilient in our work and in ourselves, as we're all facing a very new and interesting landscape of education right now. So I'm excited to dive into all of this with you. And I loved this image from the Observer about, you know, when all this is over, what should change? And there's this sense of everything in some regards. So we're going to try and explore some of that today. With all that being said, I just wanted to set some kind of opening thoughts that normally when we have these kind of conversations about ourselves and vulnerability and everything else, there's a lot of trust that needs to be there, and depending on who is in the room, we may not have that trust yet. So trust is normally how consistent we are over time with each other, and this is really a small little chunk of time. Normally I would try and get everybody to kind of crowdsource some group agreements. I'm going to put some suggested ones up here, but I would like to kind of hear from people after we get through those. There are other ones that they want to voice and kind of put together. So as we're having conversations about what we're doing or how we're feeling or experiences, I'd offer us or want us to speak personally for ourselves as individuals. Assume that people are coming from a positive intent with questions or comments they may make, but also take ownership of any impact you may have. You may have a negative impact on somebody without actually realizing it. So if you are made aware of that, take ownership over it and move forward from there. As we have discussions, honor the right for people to pass, step up and step back, or you then too, just basically being aware of your voice in the conversations and how many other people have had a chance to speak. And then the stories stay, learnings leave. This is being recorded. The breakout rooms, as far as I know, will not be recorded. So that's really where a lot of this comes in, is that in the breakout rooms, you can feel comfortable to share with the understanding that stories stay, learning leave. So with all of that, can I kind of get a read on the room? How are you guys feeling about those? Are there any other things that you think we should be bringing into this conversation? Seeing a lot of studious faces, but no major disagreements or anything like that. And I'm seeing in the chat, I think I'm seeing in the chat that there were 2 chat pieces, but I'm missing the, oh, there it is. Okay, sounds like we're in good shape. If anything else comes up, especially in the breakout rooms, please speak up to each other and make sure that we're making a safe space for everybody. With that being said, I kind of want to give you an idea of why I'm here and what this session is all about. And so this is me, and I'm willing to bet this is all of you in one way, shape, or form or another, and you can put whatever you want on either end of those. For me, the two pieces are this idea of the new normal, and everybody wanting to get back to normal, and the idea of us putting a mask basically over what was normal and what we did before, and somehow that makes everything better, when I'm not really convinced I want to get back to normal. I think there's a lot of challenges with the way normal was before, especially when we start thinking about equity and inclusion. And then, just like I had for the initial image, when this is all over, what should change? Everything. That would be great. We have no bandwidth. Like, how the heck do we, there's so many things that we could change. And how do we individually, collectively figure out what those are and how to do it? So this is my tension, is that I understand and I like routine. Those of you who do know me know that I love organizing and routine and all those wonderful things, but like many teachers, but this is just a challenge. So this is why I'm here and talking about these types of things. And I noticed very quickly into the pandemic in general that I can't go back in the way that I'm thinking and the way that I'm feeling and what things I'm paying attention to, because I'm fundamentally different in terms of how I interact with the world. And so we're going to start this off. I'm actually looking and seeing how many participants are here. We've got 20. So I am going to send us into breakout rooms for quick introductions, just so you've got a little bit more of a personal connection with some people. But when you come back, I'd like to hear some offerings of why you're here, but in the breakout rooms, if you can kind of share with each other, why did you pick this session? Maybe you just randomly ended up here, but what was it about the title or the thought or the whatever, like what brought you here today for a session on personal and professional resilience? Okay. With that being said, can I breakout room people?
I can make you the host, or I can make the breakout rooms.
Jen, you might be speaking to this, but one of the things I've been thinking about is, in order, we keep talking about self-care and, like not burning yourself out and, not taking risks. Like if you've got a sniffle or a cold, then maybe it's better to stay home, and all of which I agree. But what I worry about is that, so ICS, has only so many substitutes and has only so many, and so like, how do we keep functioning as a school in a way that's, I don't want to say productive, because that means that, but that's, going well and supportive of students and teachers and so on, when resources are, personnel resources are stretched so thin, and they're just limits. So that's just been on my mind.
I think I'll definitely be speaking to kind of the broader view of that rather than the granular view of it. But it makes perfect sense that's in your mind, even as you started talking about it, the idea of the language that we do or don't have to talk about what we want education to look like. What is productive time in school, or what do we want to be modeling? It's definitely part of what I'm trying to bake into this conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. It looks like we've got most people back from the breakout rooms. Thanks for doing that, Robin. I was just having little conversations as we were waiting for you to come back. But I would love to hear from anybody that's willing to share kind of a general sense. You don't have to share necessarily what you said or an individual said, but what's the general sense that people are having of why you're here? What's brought you all here? And feel free to unmute and just share with us.
I just said on Monhegan here that the concept of having to be resilient is like a whole new concept. This isn't the resilience we used to talk about, and challenges are a totally different one, because there's like a different level of stress on everyone all the time, and I just really want to find ways that to support each other in these remote settings because of that.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Anybody else want to share?
I think in our group, the big theme was that all of us are finding ourselves in very changed circumstances, and we're all seeking some kind of resilience and not sure where to find it, maybe.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, I think that the word resilience was something that I picked very purposefully because I'm getting increasingly frustrated with the idea of sustainability, with the idea of like, how do we keep going at this level that we're at, or how do we make this thing go indefinitely, when really the number of changes to the system and the things that get thrown at us, there are some things that, yes, it's good to keep going, but there's a lot of things that we have to think about adapting and being resilient to bounce back to. And so when Jessica, you're talking about the resilience being different than what we've talked about before, or this idea of, you know, how do we keep going with these perturbations in general, is definitely part of why I'm interested in framing it this way. And also thinking about kind of what you're talking about, your needs to be able to function. Some people were talking about the just how do we keep going. I was talking with people in the room before everybody came back about even the language that we use in schools about productivity and what does it look like when things shift. And I think a lot of people have really at the very beginning of the school year been using this hierarchy of needs mentally in terms of working with their students, of recognizing even at the end of last year that there was this like so much at the base of just student needs, of making sure that they were okay and they felt okay and that they felt cared for. That is just basic Maslow's hierarchy that we've been trying to make sure are okay even before the remote learning, even before the actual instruction. Like there's just so much access and everything else. The part that people aren't talking about as much or aren't working on as much is really the teacher's version of this. And so thinking back, I mean, as educators, largely we've somewhere along the lines, we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs for students and their student development, but it's not just students, it's like thinking about us and what our needs are too. And when we're talking about personal and professional resilience, that's almost at the self-actualization level. Like that is the, okay, how do I optimize? How do I take care of myself up there? But what's baked in is all of this, like, okay, do I feel safe? Does my school, like, do I feel comfortable in terms of the things that we're setting up for keeping people safe, or how we can have conversations as colleagues? So I'm trying to shift the conversation today away as much from the students and more towards you, of how we keep you going. And part of that is professionally, how do we keep your classes going so that your work is happening and you're not completely stressed out about the work? But then how do you personally take care of yourself that isn't related to the work? So that's part of where we're headed today. With all of this, I've got kind of two parts of the work we're going to do. Part of it is trying to get, it's really all about giving you tools. And I want them to be adaptable and evergreen. That idea of whether we're in the classroom or out of the classroom, whether it's hybrid or remote or whatever, what this continuum of whether I'm in the classroom or a substitute is teaching for me or anything like that. How do we create lessons and work and everything else that helps this continuity happen, regardless of where all these little perturbations are happening? And that's the professional resilience part that I want to speak to, is how do we create lessons that, regardless of all these other things, can actually kind of keep functioning and keep the kids functioning. And then parallel to that, the personal aspect of it, of using similar constructs, how can we apply that to your own life, and go from there? So tall order, but we're gonna get into all of that. So the professional construct I'm going to be using is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm not entirely sure how many of you actually have heard of them before, but they are a set of goals that basically the UN came up with for the world to keep us sustainable, and the goal is by 2030 to have all of these different areas focused on. I'm bringing this up because of how many different areas the UN Sustainable Development Goals cover, and the fact that the United States is pretty far behind in terms of us actually getting into and adopting these. So it's not common knowledge among many teachers, but many other countries already have really robust pre-K through adult frameworks for how this can get meet standards and be baked into the classroom. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals are broken into 17 chunks, and they're all interrelated, but they hit all of these major areas of like, how do we create a resilient society that actually values everybody, that gives everybody a baseline quality of life and human existence that shows that they have human worth. And then also the really granular, how do we then interact with nature and the world and keep the world going, the earth going. So to give you kind of a better idea of what this looks like and why I would suggest using this as a framework, regardless of what age you're working with or what topic, even school nurses and everything else, there are pieces here that you can tap into. I'm going to use the life below water as an example to get us into it. So the big picture of life below water is to conserve and sustainably use ocean, seas, and marine resources. So just right now, if you even kind of popcorn out ideas, what are, taking that big picture goal and trying to break it down into smaller chunks, what are some ways that we actually could tell that we were conserving marine resources? What are some ways that we could tell that we are, sustainably using the oceans and seas? So if anybody can unmute, and if you think of anything, even something that you teach in your class that relates to this, how could we tell that we're conserving and sustainably using our marine resources?
I guess one thing that comes to mind just here in Maine is, if we're monitoring our fisheries, that we're getting good numbers, or that populations are sustaining themselves, or that protected species are rebounding from lower levels.
Nice. Okay, so looking at fisheries and how much we are harvesting, aren't harvesting, what does the data say that is out there for populations? All of that makes perfect sense. Thanks for starting us off, Annie. Anybody else have any ideas on how we can look at the health of our oceans and marine resources?
I mean, just anecdotally, if kids are going to look in tide pools, are there living things there? Like using our classrooms to go out and explore and find evidence that there's life, and to notice changes when there is no longer, life in those tide pools. And so just by experience.
That's great. Yeah, definitely just by experience, and also what they're finding in the tide pools, what's alive there, and then also a lot of times we end up going out and doing marine debris cleanup. So what is the trash that we're finding out there, the pollution that we're finding out there? It's another thing we can measure. And thank you, Mandy, for adding into there. So what I'm gonna have us do, if you look at all of these, they basically took that big picture. I'm gonna flip back. I know people are already starting to look at this. I'm just gonna flip back so that you can see that big picture goal. So you've got this vision of conserving and sustaining the marine resources. They make it more granular to those targets that you're talking about in terms of looking at fishing, looking at what organisms are out there, looking at marine pollution. And those targets allow us to see if we're making our way towards meeting this big picture visionary goal. And again, through all of this, I'm going to be trying to use language that then also applies to personal goal setting and how we take care of ourselves. So with this, we have this kind of visionary goal. We need to break it down into smaller chunks that we actually can measure to think about if we're meeting this goal. So now that you've kind of seen how one of these works, and thinking about this being kind of a framework that we can put our own education work within, I'm going to send you out into breakout groups again. And I'm going to drop in the chat, if I can find the chat, there we go. There is a Google Doc there, depending on what breakout group, and let me see if I can share this whiteboard. This is going to be an opportunity for you and your breakout group to think about what you already are teaching, either content-wise or social-emotional-wise or anything like that, with your students that might fit into one of these goals. So even without knowing what the little targets are, if you think about no poverty, so thinking about financial pieces, or what does taking care of each other look like emotionally. We've talked a lot today in the whole conference about inequalities, gender, otherwise. So whichever breakout room you go into, use that slide, and Post-it notes essentially are already there for each of you to be able to write down something you're already doing in your class that could relate to one of these goals. I'm seeing some nodding heads. Does anybody have any questions before we send you out into breakout rooms? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up, questions, great. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes in a breakout room. So you'll head out into there, just coming up with ideas, put them down on the Post-it notes so we'll all be able to see everything, and then also feel free to discuss with each other what that actually looks like until we bring you back, okay? All right, go ahead into your breakout rooms. All right, it's looking like most people are back, even if you got the Zoom, or not Zoom, the Google Doc up. Anybody want to share out from their group a cool idea that somebody talked about that they're already doing in their own class that might be related to one of these goals?
In our group, in a math class, a high school level math class, the teacher had the students collecting data about electricity usage and compared electricity usage from using regular incandescent or fluorescent bulbs compared to LED bulbs, and had the kids do that. And that would be kind of fun to do with little kids too. I'm just trying to think about how to do that.
Nice, nice. So a good project where they actually saw some kind of real world connections to what they were learning about above and beyond, and then going to the affordable clean energy possibly, or things like that with goals, the sustainable development goals. Anybody else want to share anything out?
From our group, Mark and I both chose 16 peace, justice, and strong institutions. And like you set forth in the beginning about like trust and kind of the contract that we go into when we communicate, I think that I mean, I know, Hannah, you're new to me, but the other three of us do that too, and try to create that that idea of justice in the classroom, and kind of democratically coming up with what that agreeing to those terms, basically. And you didn't mention that specifically, Hannah, but I'm listening to you talk about the work that you do. I'm guessing that you do that too.
So I appreciate you sharing that from your room, Mandy, and thinking about the how we connect students' kind of social emotional health and the bigger picture of how they are citizens in the world, in addition to some of these more concrete, tangible content pieces with justice and peace and everything else. It's really interesting to think about what holistic education could look like rather than departmental or content area wise. Thank you all for going in there, and you can all go back in later on and look and see what other people have put in their spot as well. We're going to start transitioning over with, okay, we've got this framework of goals and then starting to think about the personal pieces. But I just want to, as we're moving from the sustainable development goals into personal goals, thinking about the reason I'm bringing up all the sustainable development goals is that with that goal framework and then also the topics that are in there, there's an opportunity for us to think, like I said, more holistically about the things that we're teaching, and thinking also about the way that we're teaching them. What I heard from what you all were saying and what you were writing in your boxes, in terms of what we know works for getting students to be really excited about learning, is some of that real world relevancy, project-based learning, having their work interdisciplinary rather than it just being a what do we learn in English class, what do we learn in math class. Anybody else want to add in anything that they talked about a way to teach that was coming up that actually felt like it works for kids? I'm normally really good with the long teacher wait, but I also want to get you guys to some of the other pieces, so I'm not going to do the long teacher wait. Or Mandy, did you have something? Yeah.
I just want to, from my personal experience, and I feel like in my group, Hannah and Mark, this is kind of where you guys overlap, and that is the idea of like movement and physically experiencing learning, right? And Mark, I know Mark because he led improv for the TLC at a field trip last year. And when we were in our first breakout group, I told him what an impact he had, especially on the older students, the middle schoolers. I mean, all of the kids, but I was saying how it can be really hard to get middle schoolers to be so vulnerable. And he was expert at it. And so it was just such a fun experience. And so I would say, whatever you're doing, Mark, that kind of physicality and like creating a safe space, like you were saying, it worked. And the kids were fully engaged. And it's one of the things that they talked about in our reflection afterwards that was so great about the field trip. And so, and Hannah is new, but she was talking about that, the importance of, maybe Hannah, you can pick up, but like being physical and being outside and engaging with your body.
Yeah, hands-on work is what students really love. And also, doing activities that are science-based and teaching them that curriculum terminology and skills, while at the same time getting them out and about, because they're either sitting in front of a computer doing Zoom or stuck in a classroom. They can't go on field trips. So I think combining physical education with the curriculum that you need to teach is really good for their physical and mental and emotional well-being too.
Thank you both for sharing. And then Kiki, were you about ready to say something before I started to move us on?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, and this is just good teaching practice, but giving kids choice about, but not only like a specific like project, for example, but also like how they might want to share it or pursue it and so on. That's it.
Fantastic. Yes, all of those. And anybody else? I see Molly saying putting students at the center of an investigation, drivers of each step. Robin loves the phys ed integration, outside learning. These are all really great answers. And thinking about those kind of real world relevance, big picture sustainable development goals, there's a lot of ways that we can integrate those things into it. And there's been a lot of research recently on kind of what we know works for place-based, project-based learning. And these ideas of getting students really investigating something, the science aspect that you were talking about, the project-based approaches, empowering the students to have the choice, like with Molly saying, putting the students at the center of the investigation, and the social, emotional, and the physical aspect. Like, yes, it sounds like the students working with Mark were individually having their own physical interaction with themselves in a new way, but at the same time also interacting with each other, and having those social connections. And we all know as teachers, we heard it many times in terms of the backwards design. So starting with what is your goal and designing backwards from there as to how do we actually meet it. And so if our goal, it doesn't say anything about having to keep kids inside or having to use a textbook or having to and none of those things. So thinking about what is the actual goal and what's the best way to meet it under these new kind of constraints that we're working within, in a way that helps the students and helps the teachers keep going with all of the different changes. Sometimes hard when we get stressed out to remember some of those just basic frameworks and going back to them as this is how we can start again, but not necessarily start from scratch. So start with where you are with what you have. So I will be providing, there are pre-K through adult curriculum frameworks that are really detailed and have so many activities and ways of thinking about and connecting all of these. So Canada has a great one. They're just all over, and they're really detailed, as well as having really good images, connections. Like they just have their full curriculum frameworks. So I'll be providing those so you've got something to work with and thinking about how it could interact with your own curriculum. But thinking now about transitioning into your own personal resilience. We've talked about goals, we've talked about targets, and being able to measure things as you go along, and what works for students. The connection I made between the UN Sustainable Development Goals and kind of personal development really came when I started seeing images like this, where a company was looking at how they were meeting certain goals in what extent. And so all of these are it's kind of like a bar graph where they're saying that I'm meeting goal number 8 about here, and I'm meeting goal number 11 about here. And some of the things that struck me about this was that it acknowledges that there are these multiple areas of goals. They're not trying to improve everything all at once. They're not trying to max everything out and be the best at everything. And over time, they can keep revisiting how they're doing on these goals and how far along they are, and adapt over time. So this was the first oh, okay, I can start thinking about this, actually applying it to my own personal life. And then I saw this one, and that was really the kicker for me. Have any of you seen a graph like this in kind of a personal development world at all? No. Oh, you are, I want to get my hands on all of you for way more sessions. This could be so much fun. So there's something that people do call a life compass, and I'm going to be having all of you kind of look at that. And this is something that, starting from the center and going out, again, measuring how far along you are on different goals. And ooh, this is coming up a little blurry for me. I'm not sure if it is for you as well, but you can see the same type of thing. Rather than it being quality education, gender equality, it's like looking at different areas that you set for your own life, of your physical environment, your personal growth, who you are personally, financially. And again, blurry, but here's the other one, the full view. So thinking about you as a dynamic whole being that has multiple aspects to you that matter, and they may not matter all equally. But if we look at those same things that I just put up for the UN Sustainable Development Goals with a company, it's acknowledging multiple areas of your life. If you try, like fundamentally, if I asked you, like, could you expect to change all of these things and max them out or anything like that all at once? You would say no, but I'm willing to bet that in your real life, like if you're actually like, oh, why can't I just figure this out? Why can't I just do this other thing? Why can't I figure out how to integrate my family with all of the new demands at work? There's this pull, this productivity. I was talking with Kiki earlier about even just using the word of productivity at work. What does productivity look like tends to be in the white supremacist type of culture that we tend to kind of live in. Productivity equals more, equals better, equals maxing out. And so thinking about, we can't expect to max everything out, and we need to keep looking at what we're doing over time and adapting it. Also, if you see these big picture pieces like fun and recreation, it feels very much like the UN Sustainable Development Goals with these categories that are kind of amorphous. And so trying to hit something like that or trying to hit a goal, it kind of feels amorphous, a little bit like this life underwater did, of this big picture. Okay, life underwater, personal development. How do we start making it more granular? So I want to give you a little bit of an example. So what I've done personally for myself is I have a goal which seemed appropriate for this conference in terms of social justice. And so social justice is my goal. I act to dismantle oppressive systems through imperfect progress, transparency, and accountability is kind of the goal statement that I have. And then I can break that down into smaller pieces, looking at what are some targets that I can actually address over time. And so we know that with student goals and learning in the environment in schools, that these project-based, these hands-on, the reflection, it actually being relevant to your life, empowering you and making you feel like you have control over something when this whole world is going a little haywire. Being able to talk with other people and work with them socially, and then designing with specific goals in mind. That's part of why I wanted to bring these two frameworks together into one presentation of how do we create these systems mentally of how we think about our goals at work, our goals for ourselves, keep taking care of ourselves, making resilient systems at work. That instead of it feeling like we have to do something new in every arena, that we can create these baseline systems that we use, even backwards design in our own lives, for how we take care of ourselves. If we feel empowered because we actually have a goal and we know these granular steps, and design with these goals in mind. The pieces that I'm going to share with you right now, screen sharing has stopped as the window is closed. Great. So there is this this PDF that I just dropped in the chat is a compass assessment, the one that I was showing on here, that you can go through on your own life, that has more details of how to actually get started. And it has an assessment scoring, so you don't have to break things down yourself if you don't want to, thinking about how to take care of yourself or how to think about your finances or whatever. If that is looking too big in terms of the granularity or getting into it, and you're just like, I'm kind of still in crisis mode and thinking about all these little things that I should be doing or could be doing, is just stressful. The next piece that I would offer up is the same company did a pandemic version of just taking care of yourself and how to think about basically thriving in the face of a lot of change. And it is much more of a checklist, a breath, how to stay connected with people. It takes those areas and makes it a little bit more actionable rather than on you to figure things out. And finally, what you saw that I did was taking those areas and making my own how this looks for me. So I've made a Google Doc for people to use and copy as you see fit. And all of these will be in a resource folder later on. I just didn't know what to do with them ahead of time. But that final thing that I dropped in the drive is just an editable Google Doc that you can create your own of what things matter to you. And you'll see what I had done for myself at the beginning of the year. It's changed and morphed a ton since then. But that idea of, again, coming back to how can we, if we don't create some sort of structure for ourselves to take care of ourselves and aren't deliberate about it, it's just going to get swept under the rug. And so the more we can actually tie it to the work that we're doing in the school and the same types of structures and same ways of thinking about it, the more likely it is that it will be something that we can maintain over time. And regardless, aiming for resilience and not sustainability, that the goal doesn't have to stay the same. The way you do it doesn't have to stay the same. But thinking about what matters to you and that reflection time is something that feels really important to keep taking care of yourselves. So with that, my last piece of, I broke mine down into actionable steps that basically every month I can come back and kind of rate myself as to how I think I'm doing on it on a scale of 1 to 10 or scale of 1 to 5. And I'll make these slides available for people to play with over time. But I just wanted to say to all of you before we kind of wrap up is that I've been hearing so much from teachers saying that they're not doing enough. And it is something I know that is a very common thing for all of us to feel, especially when we see so much that needs to be fixed and so many things that need to be done. But I just want you to walk away remembering that what you're doing, even though it's not fixing everything, you can't max out everything all at once, and what you're doing is enough, and it's actually more than enough. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take all of us working together. But just knowing that all of this is a lot, and you are enough, and you're doing enough. So that's where we're at right now. And I'd be happy to keep talking or taking questions or whatever I can do, or let you just all go to lunch and fill out Compass assessments or whatever works.